Welcome back to The Move, where we're vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and today's episode, we're talking about that one time in the Bible where Abraham bargains with God over whether or not he should destroy Sodom. If you're wondering, where is this story in the Bible? It's Genesis chapter 18, verses 22 to 33. My guest is the one and the only Pastor Harold. Pastor Harold, there are a handful of stories in the book of Genesis that really, I think, for me, stand out in my mind. You know, if you grew up in the church, there are stories you're going to remember, and there's stories you're going to read for the 100th time and still forget that you ever learned about it. You remember the story of the stalking snake, the flood, of building the giant tower. And for me, this is one of these stories because it's such a weird story. I don't know that there's a lot of other parallels that are explicitly like this, where you have this back and forth between a human being and God. And there's what I can only describe right now as haggling. I don't know if you've ever been to a part of the world where haggling is a practice of the local commerce. Well, I think about when I went to Mexico, for example, on the beach there was always these individuals who were selling little trinkets and with their wares and their souvenirs. And what I was told is that one of the ways that you pay respect to the wares and the skills of these merchants is to actually engage in the process of haggling, that it's almost rude not to. And this is just kind of what immediately pops in my mind when I hear this story. For the summary, so that way we can just get it out of the way. It's God's going to judge Sodom. He's going to destroy Sodom. He tells Abraham, and Abraham's like, yo, but what if there's 50 righteous people? God's like, all right, cool. I won't destroy them. Then he just keeps lowering the number, almost pushing God as far as he's willing to go. What about 40? What about 30? What about 20? Then he lands on this number 10. And I've always thought as a kid, you know, one, it's really bold to kind of do this back and forth process with God. I think that's one conclusion. The second conclusion is like, did he go far enough? Because it's like, dude, 10 is still a larger number than 1. Like, why didn't you go all the way down to 1, Abraham? And so I don't know. Like, this story stands out in my mind for so many different reasons, and I'm just stoked to see what we get to uncover here.
Yeah, the number. Well, if we want to go with the number, I think that there's a lot to be why God and Abraham haggle. And I have haggled. I've haggled actually. I'm not good at it, but my friend Mick Henton, he's a youth pastor at the College of Church. Mm-hmm. He is an excellent haggler.
Oh, okay.
We were together in Jerusalem, and he haggled down a big shofar that I bought.
The giant ram's horn.
Yeah, the big old ram's horn. He haggled it really well. I was like, dude, I'm impressed. Because he was like, okay, well, I'm walking out, and no, please don't, you know, it's just this. Okay, how much? And he just really haggled it down, and then he looked at me and says, all right, pay it. And I said, I just looked at him, and the guy just, I was like, all right,
sounds good, take my money.
Yeah. And it is bold. I think there is boldness, and then also in the text you get to see, also an awareness of Abraham. And knowing how Abraham is before the judge of the earth. Because as we've seen before here, he knows who this character is.
Right.
He's given him steak, you know, feeds him a nice
they had a
barbecue.
Good barbecue to get some Korean barbecue, you know.
And then God's going to reveal and say, okay, I'm going to do this. And I have to tell Abraham what I'm going to do. And so they end up in this conversation. And the way that Abraham addresses God is telling of who, like, you're God, you're the judge of the earth. And there are 7 questions, significantly talking about the significance of the numbers. There are 7 questions that come up here in this story. The first one being, hey, will the judge of the, you know, would you wipe out the righteous with the wicked? The judge of the earth would not do that. You know, please forgive me for asking this, but what about 50? What if you find 50?
Right.
And God says, I won't destroy it for 50. And then they go down, like you said, 45. And then he arrives to 10. This is the 7th question, 10. And 10 is significant because it becomes later, the number later in Judaism, this number is the minimum required for a worshiping community, right? It is also the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the yod. So it's kind of almost like he comes down to 10, the minimum requirement of people. The minimum, like the bare basic minimum requirement of the people. And more than haggling here, Abraham is actually interceding for people. He's interceding for a city that really won't affect them. Remember, Lot is the one who lives in the city, not Abraham.
Right.
Right. Lot. So Abraham could easily be like, well, that sounds like a Lot problem.
That's a you problem, not a me problem.
That's a you problem, bro. Like, your city gonna get destroyed. Oh well, sucks to be you. But he doesn't. Abraham doesn't take that approach. He actually is interceding for a city and for people that won't necessarily affect him, that might not necessarily affect his livelihood, but he is still thinking about his nephew in the city. And so he intercedes. He begins to intercede. Kind of like, who's this guy that is always interceding for us? I think his name is it Jesus?
Oh, yeah,
Jesus,
yeah.
right?
I've heard that guy before.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah. Who lives to always intercede for us. And there is this really, it's just how Abraham is also embodying this intercession. And it's not because God is angry and needs a whipping boy,
Right.
God's not up there like, who ate my mangoes? I'm gonna go. I need to kill somebody for eating my mangoes. But actually, in the whole text, once again, you see it here, right there at verse 21, where God says, "I'm gonna go down and see it for myself."
Yeah.
God is willing to be challenged in his judgment. This is what you begin to see in this narrative, and that God is transparent and open with the process.
Yeah.
So much.
So sorry, I didn't mean to. Ben and I actually talked about this in the previous episode. This idea that God is open to, he's willing to let other people audit kind of the work of judgment that he does. And this is actually a really good thing, because one, you don't want a dictator who just executes judgment and you ask questions and you're like, how dare you ask me that off with your head, right? Like, there's this auditing perspective that's really, really valuable for a healthy government, right? Like, there's transparency that exists. And so it's definitely not that. You said something about 10 being the smallest unit, and I'm just thinking, like, I'm doing the math in my head. It's like 10's not a large number, and it's, we're gonna foreshadow. Obviously, judgment does happen. 10 isn't found, and Lot and his family is pulled from Sodom. But there's this really interesting moment, and I know because I've actually recorded the episode already, we don't focus on it in that episode, so I want to bring it up right now. There's this moment where basically Lot goes to try and round up his family. And he's unable to even get 10 with his family. Like, I think just the people who survived the whole judgment of Sodom, it's like Lot.
And his two daughters.
Not even 4, not even Lot's wife, because Lot's wife turns around and then turns into the pillar of salt. We'll get into that story later.
Salty.
But like, he falls dramatically shy of that number. But like, imagine if he was able to get only his own family. Like, there's this moment where he arrives at the house of his daughter, and he's talking to his daughter's husband, and he's like, yo, judgment's coming, let's get out of here. And like, his son-in-laws literally think that he's making a joke, and so they don't go with him. It gets me thinking, when we move into a city, right? Jesus talks about how we are a light to the world, right? How we're salt of the earth. Like, there's a certain element and there's a certain responsibility that people of faith have to influence a community for good. And we know that there's a lot of times where people are like, oh man, so-and-so city is terrible, or I'm sure you get this a lot in your city in Seattle. Seattle's just this wicked place. It's this terrible place. It's like, okay, cool. True, maybe even, but the question is like, what are we doing to actually impact the city? What are we doing to change things? And so if there was any sense of a missional kind of a directive for Lot, it's clear that he failed in this moment. He couldn't even save his own
family. Listen, man, that is so on point, because you're hitting on something that is very, very relevant, because I hear a lot. I hear a lot.
I see
that.
There's the joke. You laugh for what? I'm like, what are you laughing for? A lot there. That's lot. The but okay, got it.
But I'll be here all week. There's a lot of questioning. There's of that sentiment towards cities, man. Especially within our own community of faith, our Seventh-day Adventist community of faith. We have this very end time prone mindset, that we have this almost phobia of the cities, right?
Yeah, there's this fear that cities are going to be judged, and therefore, because of stories like this and other stories, we should all run away from the cities and go into the hillsides.
Yep. And the thing is, it seems to me that if your default perspective on a city full of human beings is going to be, well, that's a they problem and not a me problem because I'm saved, you are missing the point of what light and salt are supposed to be. And that context is really problematic, and that mindset is problematic. I believe that is the mindset that has gotten us into so much of the problems that we have when we look at urban ministries and when we look at churches within cities, especially within our, again, Adventist community of faith, is that we look at the cities and we say, well, they're hubs of wickedness. Shalt we not live there? And we move out instead of actually looking at the city as the prospect of these are people. And it's almost like us Adventists or Christians, we like to, instead of being interceding, we like to be judging. And in this passage, I find that there is one judge of the earth,
Right.
who is acknowledged by the interceding party. And he says, you're the judge. You see what's best. And thank you for allowing me to actually audit the books. I am humbled at this prospect because you are the sovereign judge. But what about 50? Okay, listen, what about the bare minimum? Like, would you save the city with the bare minimum? There's this quote from a guy named Gerhard Hazel, who actually talks about how it is revolutionary because there's this old collective thinking that would bring the guiltless member of the guilty association under punishment. So kind of like guilt by association, right? But it's transposed on into something new. He says, because the presence of a remnant of righteous people could have a preserving function for the whole, like salt. For the sake of the righteous remnant, Yahweh would in his righteousness forgive the wicked city. And this is a expanded notion in the prophetic utterance of the servant of the Lord, the Messiah, right? In Isaiah 53, who through his righteousness expands it. His righteousness is the one that brings it about. So the whole salt and light thing is actually a practical application of what we should be doing. So Abraham is giving us an illustration of what we should be doing about our cities. Listen, your city is bad and wicked. Well, quit griping about it and do something about it. And by doing something about it, it doesn't mean go in, pitch a tent, and tell them to follow 28 little dictums of whatever it is that you believe in without any contextualization, without any understanding, without any care. It's kind of like, how about we just go love the people with no strings attached? You know, how about we just go and intercede for the people regardless of how they will respond to what you are saying to them? How about you, instead of griping about how bad the city of Seattle is and how liberal and how blah, 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 how about you just go love, like for real. You just go do something productive and pray for the city and actually go care for the city. There was a certain there's a publication of a conference that will remain unnamed because I don't want to throw them under the bus. I have some respect for them. All right. But they published they were planning a city. They were planning a church in like downtown of the city, right? And the city's not necessarily known for being, you know, like Seattle. Ooh, you know, it was just a city. And the thing they put out in their communique or in their little newsletter was something like, oh, it's such a hostile environment because there are all these gay pride flags and these Black Lives Matter signs and hardly a place for a church to flourish. Well, yeah, if you're going with that mindset and that mentality.
Yeah, of course it's going to fail.
Of course, that like, oh, these people, they're like aggressive and they're mean to you because you're a church and you're not going to fit in. And it's, hardly a place. First of all, you're looking at them with condescension, right? Because somehow you're better than them because you're not either whatever you want to be, right? You're looking at them that they need some solution to you. So it's this sort of like colonialistic, I'm going to give you this thing that you need, which true, you do need this freedom. This freedom is going to make your life so much better. But there's a way of approaching it that doesn't come across as such a condescending, I am worth more than you because of this, right?
Yeah, when
Now,
Jesus preaches the gospel, it's dignifying to
Right.
the individual.
Exactly.
You are
Yes.
valuable. You are worthy. You might have been feeling like you're worthless and that you're trash and that you're discarded by God. But no. The gospel is such that you are valuable, created in the image of God. And the way that many times we being the capital C church, the way that we preach the gospel is you suck, you suck, you suck. That's why you should repent. It's like,
goodness.
That's not good news. That sucks.
No. But here's the thing. If we transpose it into the context of Jesus, it was the organizational, institutional, quote unquote church, because it was the institutional religion, the religious institution that was actually looking at people, telling them, you suck, and therefore you need to do what we do and be as fastidious about keeping the law as we are, so that we could all get the Messiah to come and free us from the Romans. And it was a completely different mindset, which is why Jesus comes in and he subverts the entire notion by, first of all, going into the places, sinners and tax collectors, eating with sinners and tax collectors, hanging out with those horrible people in the downtown city with their gay flags and their Black Lives Matter signs, right? Oh, how hostile is this?
God forbid. Oh my goodness.
God forbid, Jesus, right?
God
Literally,
forbid you were
Jesus.
a friend of sinners.
Right. And actually, like, immersing yourself into that community. So I think that there's something to be said about Abram's intercession. Abraham at this point, he's Abraham now. Abraham's intercession, his location outside of Sodom was not his personal choice. It was because Lot went there first, right? I think there's something to be said about Lot's, failure perhaps to be the bare minimum, right? Of 10. How God brings judgment upon Sodom because of this, right? And even if you think about the flood story, if we're going to go with the 10, not even Noah achieved 10.
Right. Only 8.
It's only 8, right? So this entire idea of just a bare minimum, and it wasn't Noah's fault. I mean, Peter says that Noah preached his heart out for 120 years and nobody listened.
Yeah.
which
tough times, man.
Jeez,
Your church
talk
is
about
difficult.
Talk about zero baptisms, right? Jeez, So I think there is this aspect of the story that we get, first of all, of Abraham interceding for the city, of Lot, seemingly having some sort of failure, of a lack of being effective light. We could also say, well, the city was so wicked that there was no light left in it. And in the story of the flood, evil was running so amok that it was actually putting in danger the larger picture of salvation, right? The larger picture of righteousness, the larger picture of salvation through humanity was going to be snuffed out, and God had to intervene. And it seemingly, in a very small microcosm, it's the same thing happening here in Sodom. But somehow the fact that there isn't the bare minimum is really telling of why God acts and how God acts, how God, as the judge of the earth, acts, and how Abraham is interceding, and how we should be interceding, not running away from the city, not looking at it as like, oh, this bad place, we shouldn't live here. And I hear that a lot. I do hear that a lot. And sometimes that it frustrates me because, quit griping about it. Like, what are you doing about it? Sometimes you even hear people, you hear what people are doing about it. You're like, that's what you're doing about it. Yeah, I'm giving a tract. Okay. Super useful, maybe to you. Have you thought of something else you could be doing for the people that you deem so unworthy of your company and that you're so scared of? Like, just how about being nice? How about being kind? How about being genuinely, with no strings attached, caring for them? There's this little lady called Ellen White, and there's a quote that's coming to mind right now where she says that the method of Christ alone is the one that can reach, and I say little lady not in a demeaning way. She was literally short. She was like 4.5 feet tall or something like that. And she's one of the founders of this Adventist community that we belong to. And she has an immense, he says, a plethora of literature written. And one of them is talking about, I'm going to destroy this quote, but she says, the method of Christ alone is the one that will render fruits. Basically, it's like Christ went and met people in their needs. Mm-hmm. He ministered to them. He cared for them. And then after all of that, he said, follow me.
Dude, okay.
That's the difference.
I'm going to jump in because you did bastardize the quote, and it's a very good quote. Let me read it to you, and then I'm going to read the paragraph after that no one ever quotes, because it's
okay,
exactly
go.
to your
please,
point.
please.
Like, it actually, you're making the point without even realizing it. Christ's method alone will bring true success in reaching the people. This is the phrase that everyone remembers. Mm-hmm, the Savior mingled with people as one who desired their good. He showed sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, and won their confidence. Then he invited them, follow me. So that's a quote that most people read. The next paragraph is telling, we need to come close to the people by personal effort. If we would give less time to sermonizing and more time to personal ministry, greater results would be seen. What does she mean? What does this look like? The poor are to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and the bereaved comforted, the ignorant instructed, the inexperienced counseled. We are to weep with those who weep and to rejoice with those who rejoice. Accompanied by the power of persuasion, the power of prayer, the power of the love of God, this work cannot be without fruit. She's talking about literally practically serving and loving on people as opposed to just sermonizing. And I just think that's wonderful. How cool is it that we have a messenger in our church, to use that language? How awesome is that we have someone who's like, guys, stop preaching. And it's easy for me to say that because I'm not a pastor. I'm not a preacher. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, amen, less sermons. This is fantastic. But like, what would it look like if churches spent more time serving communities and actually being the light of the world, as opposed to just pointing down from our ivory towers and saying, you suck, and you suck. That's not the gospel. The gospel is we embody goodness. We come into the community that is struggling, and we get our hands dirty, and we serve alongside them, and we love them in a dignifying and redeeming manner.
Preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. That quote is a quote that gets up to my mind. So, man, I think that this story this story has a lot for us, and one of the things that it has is that main point of, hey, instead of being the judge, how about you let the judge, and how about you and I go and intercede? How about you and I go do what we are supposed to do? And let the judge what he needs to judge. Haggle it down if you have to, man.
This is the part of the episode that we normally plug something amazing and beautiful, and today's episode is no different, but rather than tell you about a show or a podcast or a book that you should read, we are plugging something else that is way more profound and way more miraculous than the next podcast or the next YouTube channel. Something amazing and quite literally miraculous has happened in the last couple of weeks, and we as a community just want to celebrate the good work and just celebrate with you, Harold. Harold, what has happened in the last couple of weeks?
I have lost sleep.
Yes,
true. Time is a very liquid concept at this point, but it is all worth it.
If you're watching the video version, you may see at different times Harold's eyes kind of tracking to the corner, and it's because of what you're seeing on screen right now. What a beautiful little baby! This is absolutely precious. Can you share the name with those who are watching and listening?
Yes. That little beautiful baby there. Oh, I mean, every time, I don't care that I'm sleepless. It's just, her name is Gianna Yire. Gianna means God is gracious. Yire literally means he will see to it. It's part of Genesis 22. Eventually, we'll probably talk about that, but we have seen that God is gracious and that he has seen to it in this little girl's life from the very beginning to now, and continues to see it. So that's what happened. That's where there's not a whole, my brain doesn't function as well right now, but
the fatigue in real time.
Yeah.
This is your family's second child. And yes. I know that there's a whole backstory and why this is such a miraculous moment, but long story short, we just want to celebrate your family. It's an exciting time. We're so happy for you. It's actually behind the scenes. It's been a couple of weeks since you and I last really got to sit down and talk because of this exact thing. We pre-produced a handful of episodes so that way you could just take some time off. But
I know.
man, what a privilege, what a joy. We're so happy for you, and man, we're excited for just everything that God's going to continue doing in this growing family.
Yeah, no, she's beautiful, and moms are amazing. If that's a plug. Moms are amazing, dude. Moms are incredible. So if you have a mom, go thank her, because they go through a lot for you to stay alive, and it doesn't end once you exit the womb. It never ends, man. So moms are amazing. That's all I gotta say. That's my plug. Moms are amazing.
Moms are in fact amazing. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
We're praying for you guys.